Hi, everybody. Well, you know, my father always wanted me to follow in his footsteps and become a rabbi like he was. I was born a free thinker and highly analytical and scientific in my thinking. So I really felt that it would be odd that now I'm speaking to you on Shabbat about a Jewish tradition. And I've spent the last 3 years studying Judaism and studying the questions of identity and continuity. I realize that there's no tradition that's more connected with Jewish identity and continuity than the practice of Brit Milah, the sign of the covenant between God and the Jewish people. And my focus here is really to analyze why does the practice continue among progressive branches of Judaism and among unaffiliated Jews and secular Jews. It's really odd, you know, that parents who otherwise don't practice Judaism, they still seek to have their sons circumcised. Some of these even refer to themselves as Jewish atheists. I want to remind everybody that there's been many fine works by Jewish activists that cover and make the case against Brit Milah from the standpoint of psychology and history and theology and feminism. In particular, I want to credit and acknowledge the work of Miriam Pollack, Ronald Goldman, Professor Leonard Glick. All of these Jewish activists have really created a foundation. I want to thank them for speaking out, and they've created a foundation for me to help build my analysis today. The desire for a Jewish identity is never more important, more apparent when you look at the phenomenon of Jewish circumcision. I mean, here you have a practice that is also done by non-Jewish Americans, by Muslims, South Koreans, and so on, yet they continue to do this in connection, to develop some kind of connection to the Jewish people, even though they may not otherwise practice Judaism. And so I was really struck with this as a need to further analyze why that would be. You know, it's a paradoxical claim, right? On the one hand, they say this is a harmless and trivial procedure that the boy won't remember, and it's cutting off just a useless piece of skin. And on the other hand, it's some kind of transcendent change in the boy that happens at the moment of the cutting of circumcision, that somehow he's now entered into a transformed state. Seems rather odd to me that that would be the case. You know, it's magical. It's a magical thinking. And by the way, it's also giving him health benefits. Circumcision is an easy choice for these unaffiliated parents to make when in a country when so many non-Jews are circumcising anyway. But it is truly connected with this need to have some connection to the past, with this superstition belief that somehow the boy is transformed, and with this magical thinking that somehow it has a health benefit. Well, it turns out that magic, superstition, and connection to one's ancestors has always been an important part of totemism. Totemism still is an important way of understanding a variety of extraordinary customs that happen worldwide. We could define a totem as an animal, a plant, or an object that is inherited, that is venerated, is claimed to be magical, and provides a connection with the legendary history and purpose of a tribe. It emerges from an ancient time to help the tribe pass on its history and its purpose. So the totem is an important part of understanding this phenomenon that we have today of circumcision. The totem has an important relationship to the tribe. The totem protects the tribe, and the tribe protects the totem. The kinsmen who share a common totem also share a common responsibility to each other. They wish to see the tribe prosper, and they protect each other, but they also hold each other responsible for the obligations and the taboos that are present in the tribal history and the tribal legends. But remembering these legendary historical events or the purpose of the tribe is just an important part of the totemic process. The oldest of customs, ceremonies, and rites have all been transferred over a long period of time before the era of writing? Well, how could we guarantee that history would be passed on from generation to generation, long before writing? What could we do? Well, I guess we could do some kind of marking on the body. And because it's so important, we'd have to do this marking at a very early age. It would have to be something that would last the life of the individual. And so it could not be lost or forgotten or stolen. And it would have to be connected somehow with procreation because it would have to be inherited. Another important part is that it would have to be unavoidable for both the receiver and the giver. Somehow, they would be compelled to pass it on. And finally, in a patriarchal culture, it would have to be something that was the obligation and the responsibility of men. There's no other ritual that's has more bodily importance than Brit Milah. Genital cutting in the Jewish community is venerated for its history and for its protection of the tribe. It is a symbol for the divine chosenness of the people, or in modern parlance, as the chosenness for changing the world, as an example to the world that the Jewish people wish to provide. So I propose a totem in understanding why the practice of Jewish circumcision continues, even in this modern day, against any change or obsolescence. And it really provides the same purpose as a traditional totem. And a totem is more than just a symbol. It is really a means of passing on legends from the past on into the future and guaranteeing the continuity of the tribe. As I will explain, this transmission is ensured in the ceremony itself. Its purpose, again, is to teach the Jewish people that they were chosen for a divine promise or as a healing force in the world. And yes, for those of you who are wondering, it does give new meaning to the word totem pole. But the circumcision has to provide a narrative discourse so that it can ensure its passage into the future in claiming to provide benefits, in claiming longevity, and a special magic provided by the ceremony. The genital cutting of a child permanently marks him on the body, this record of history that is so important to the Jewish people, that's keeping them together as people. And the day of his circumcision is also the day of his naming. His very existence is dated not to the day of his birth, but to the day of this transformation, of this cutting. And I wish to summon up the voice of my ancestors here using the totem that I've been marked with. So please bear with me for a minute here while I summon my ancestors. Brit Milah is the ultimate affirmation of a Jewish future in the unbroken chain of every male descendant down through the ages in keeping Abraham's promise. Brit Milah is the way that the past is unforgettably written upon the body of a newborn boy. All of his extended family members and friends gather in attendance in a shared visceral experience to feel and act as one people. Each of the participants, male or female, regardless of their affiliation with any other with any custom or congregation, still feel and act together as one people, passing on their tradition in this collective power of purpose, meaning, and tradition. Upon their new kin's penis, they write their tribal history on his penis, and it is a link to his descendants as well as the destiny that he ensures for them in reading his tribal history on his own penis. So how dare you, activists, take away this Jewish blessing from boys and take away transcendence from the Jewish people. Because the circumcised penis, it has no tribal history. From it can be read no past and no future. Well, circumcision emerged in cultures that practiced animal sacrifice worldwide. The slaughter of animals and the draining of the blood was an important part of religious worship in many different cultures. And it provided thanksgiving, purification, protection, atonement, and salvation. The spilling of blood was used as an anointing formula for making things holy. The end of sacrifice in 70 CE was a profound challenge to the Jewish continuity, because as the temple was destroyed, there was no official place to do the sacrifices. And so Judaism, in order to save itself, really had to transform from being a priestly worship with sacrifice to a group worship with prayer and other rituals in synagogues. And so in very early rabbinic Judaism, circumcision was transformed in that it would provide protection, obedience, and continuity to the tribe. Anthropologist Leonard Glick, he writes, there remained only one ritual that could be reinterpreted and reimagined as blood sacrifice: circumcision. The blood of circumcision, he writes, became the sacrificial blood of the covenant. Lawrence Hoffman also carries this theme forward in his book, Covenant of Blood. And he writes about the liturgy in the Rabbinic Judaism from the very start in the 2nd century, about how they describe anointing of blood and the sealing of the covenant using blood. They elevated the practice of circumcision to make it something much more than what it had been as just one of the other rituals. And in addition to that, the rise of Christianity meant that in Christian mind, Jesus was the last sacrificed, and they no longer wanted nor needed circumcision in their theology. So circumcision became an important signifier for being not Jewish, for being Jewish and not Christian. And that too has been carried forward to this day among the advocates for circumcision who, in the Jewish community still see it as an identity. In addition, Judaism was an ethnic religion and Christianity was not. And so that drew a distinction as well through their abandonment of circumcision. So for the Jews, it became the primary expression of their identity. And it also corresponded with this changes to the procedure itself. And it's generally accepted now that the rabbis by the 2nd century, they altered the procedure to remove all of the covering of the glands and the corona so that men could not pull their foreskin remnant forward and pass as Greeks in the cultures. And so in doing that, they actually, in writing the Mishnah, they made it appear that this was a practice all along, that this was the official procedure that was done. In writing down the oral law, they could make it appear that this was an unchanging procedure of God's command, and that it was not in response to any contemporary pressures of assimilation or any dissension from Jewish men. So what we have here is that circumcision is a fossilized remnant of animal sacrifice, and it is an amalgamation, really, of the drawing of blood from animals and using that blood to anoint in marking the body of the circumcised boy. The violence of animal sacrifice also conditioned Jews over many, many centuries to witness the violence of circumcision as well. So the blood sacrifice of animals then was transformed into totemic circumcision, and that it did provide many of the same benefits or features and functions that animal sacrifice had provided before. It did provide protection in their minds and connection to their people and the continuity of passing it on from generation to generation, even as the Jews were exiled in many lands and persecuted for many, many years. The purification of ritual uncleanliness and the cleansing of spiritual contamination, those are always important features of animal sacrifice, became important, notable features of circumcision. And so by providing these ancestral blessings to the boy through the totem that was dangling there for his life, there was a protection that was provided that we still see today in this modern priesthood of circumcising boys for their protection. That it took on this magical quality that this small piece of skin would provide so many benefits if it was removed. In addition, the practice of circumcision is an important part of public submission for the Jewish man, is that he is giving his son over to the circumciser in an act of obedience and commitment to the Jewish people, so that it is a test that cannot be faked. His trust, his commitment, and his obedience is there for all of his community to see. And you just cannot fake that. The father may imagine that his son is being cut in a long, long line of sons of his forefathers, going all the way back to Abraham, and that they're all linked in blood. They're all together in this common connection of spilling the blood and affirming their identity. The affirmation of Jewish identity meant validating the ancestors, meant obeying them, meant respecting them, meant finding value in their tribal history as something that could carry them on into the future, that would provide them with this meaning as being a Jew, that no other ritual could provide in that sense. After all, in the modern day, many have given up kosher laws and the Sabbath observance, but that circumcision still persists among those Jews who don't practice that. When Jews speak about observing circumcision for 4 millennia, they often neglect to say that observing is been imposed upon the boy, right? That very few Jewish people, men, choose to be circumcised, and instead it is imposed upon the boy. And they neglect to say that when they talk about observing. But observing is a very apt description of what is happening, because they are witnesses to this mutilation that is going on in their babies, and they're not realizing what is really happening. So there's this group mentality that happens in many different crimes, if I can use the word, where what is done as a group of a cruel or irrational nature would probably not be something that an individual would be doing. There's many things denied to an individual, but that the authority of the group provides and makes it legal. The ritual itself is very important to study because it does dilute the responsibility of any individual in the practice of cutting, of what is being done. And this responsibility is passed to the entire generations that might be there observing the ceremony, and so that the parents never have to take individual responsibility and think long enough about whether they want to do this. Instead, their moral intuition is dampened and diluted by the fact that it is a public ceremony. It is something that they have to send out invitations to. And so that dilutes this need to examine what they're doing. A parent can say, I did not circumcise my son. The Jewish people circumcised my son. And in that way, they can free themselves from ever examining what they've been doing. You know, the abuse and the practice of many different forms of domestic abuse that lives on in an environment that is deeply rooted in family commitments and denial, where people say, you know, this is just the way we do it. This is just the way things are done. And they criticize any kind of outside attempts at intervention, and they say, you just don't understand. And that's what we've been accused of. So these frightful acts that one might see in witnessing a circumcision have to be suppressed in order to allow the procedure to continue. And in order to let that happen, you have to suppress your natural instincts to protect the boy. And doing that really conditions people to not look at and examine their own feelings of what's going on inside of them so that their natural instincts are dampened. So they can feel innocent of any actual crime that was being done. And in fact, they're right. They don't feel that harm is being done in witnessing this, because at some point they've disassociated their feelings from that. Any parents, any families that choose not to circumcise, of course, they're threatening this disassociation because they're reminding the other families that there is a different way and that perhaps there is something wrong with this procedure that they have witnessed many times. And there's this upside-down decision that's going on with the father choosing to have his son circumcised. And again, this is where totemic circumcision is valuable, because in choosing circumcision for his son, he's actually validating his own circumcision that happened so many years ago. And in that way, the baby is just a prop that's being used in this public ceremony to say, this is what I choose. What I choose as a father, I chose as a child. I somehow magically chose this as a child, even though now I'm already been done. But it's the tribe that is really running the show here. And as a child, he couldn't say no. And as an adult, he could say no, but he doesn't because he's powerless to do so. So the practice continues, and it's reinforced because everybody seems powerless to stop it. The tribal demands is what wins. And this is how totemic circumcision can pass on to each generation, can ensure its replication for it to continue. The child who is just a powerless victim would most likely grow up to be a circumcision advocate and an apologist for circumcision and a perpetrator. And here, tradition and harm are inseparable, as well as self-reinforcing, because the psychosocial dynamics of the ceremony itself ensure that its repetition continues. Everyone in attendance are blameless. Nobody did any harm. It was all done for the benefits of the child. And in this cultural milieu and shared psyche, circumcision can continue. It's an odd and unfortunate circumstance that this group identity trumps the individual morality, and it forces them to repeat what was done before to be done now. In the Orthodox tradition, the practice of oral genital suction and the circumcision of corpses are good examples of why this tradition is so powerful and can reach back in time so far. In New York City, 2/3 of all Jewish circumcisions end with the mohel putting his mouth on the bleeding penis to suck blood from the wound. In defying the practice and this practice and defying the practice of circumcision in general, the Jewish leaders, they invoke a history of state suppression, both ancient and modern, that have been attempted to try and stop the practice. And in doing so, they create sympathy for themselves and support for continuing the practice. And there's a hypocrisy, though, in the Jewish liberal leadership in that they've revised so many traditions and beliefs that they've discarded the Talmud, for example, and to yet continue this practice. It's just very hypocritical, but it demonstrates the power of ritual for it to continue, this totemic circumcision, to insist on its replication. And it's far, far more powerful than just individual beliefs. And you notice here how little I've talked about God, because this isn't really about God, is it? It is about the group dynamics of circumcision, about how the group ensures that it continues over time. So these Jewish atheists that I mentioned, it doesn't matter to them. You see, they're going to continue it anyway as part of their peopleness, not because they believe in God, but because they believe in people. They believe in the power of meaning, of belonging, of connection, of community, and continuity. That's why they cling to the practice. And the rabbis understand this, that circumcision is the last bastion for Jewish identity. So many specious arguments and special pleadings are made, both in the last century and this century. Of course, we have all the health benefits that were claimed that Jews are happy to reference as well. And this is really to try and fight both the criticism of circumcision as well as its possible irrelevance in the modern time. As I mentioned, so many other traditions have been discarded. And I'm going to give you an example here. This is a very powerful example of the kind of apologetics that are being fostered, as well as this idea that there must be some other meaning to circumcision to allow it for us to continue. This is a Reform rabbi, Rabbi Elise Goldstein, and it bears me to read this. Since we have seen how blood offers expiation through Torah, can these few drops of covenantal blood be seen as atonement for male control, as cleansing of violence in a patriarchal world? That men teach men, father to son, of vulnerability. Let our boys be entered into a circumscribed world of men whose spiritual sensitivities are increased as their phallic-centered power is decreased. So you see the amount of twisting that is going on here, that is used to claim that this is going to be beneficial to control men. And I'm just quite taken by that level, that sophisticated argument that wishes to transform circumcision into something else beyond what it was for the ancients. And some want to fight it as just a protest against the millennia of hate and persecution that Jews went under. They say, well, we deserve to continue this practice. After all what the world has done to us, don't tell us about morality. Don't tell us about how to be good people, because you were never good people to us. Well, so we are faced with this uphill battle, and we cause a lot of anxiety in progressive Jews who otherwise they would see themselves as really champions of human rights, and now they're being accused of human rights violations. And some of them, have had their boys circumcised in their living room in front of their family and friends. And yet we're telling them that they have violated the rights of the child. And that's going to be hard for them to hear that. Many of their ideals of transforming Judaism into a higher form of spirituality and to healing the world are really contradicted by their insistence on cutting the genitals of children. And it's just unfortunate because this means that totemic circumcision has trumped morality in favor of the tribe, in favor of the group identity. So that this disassociation allows a person to disconnect from their feelings of doing the right thing. So circumcision continues regardless of the religious commitment of these folks, because it continues in the minds of the group. It is ensured by the ceremony that they have participated in, by their shared guilt that they already possess. The ceremony itself conditions participants to continue it. Well, so how could this totemic circumcision possibly end? Well, Professor Anthony Appia, he studied dueling in the 19th century, and he studied slavery and Chinese foot binding. And he looked at how these practices that once were very, very entrenched in human culture were made to go away in a relatively short order. One day, people will find themselves thinking not just that an old practice was wrong and a new one right, but that there was something shameful in the old ways. In the course of the transition, many will change what they do because they are shamed out of an old way of doing things. And so it's this shame that is a powerful motivator for people to change. 2,000 years ago, animal sacrifice was an important part of Jewish tradition. Every year in Jerusalem, thousands of animals were methodically killed, their throats slit, and their blood drained. Well, today in Jerusalem, the Israelis could build a new temple, they could build a new sacrificial altar, because all of the laws in the Torah and the Talmud for sacrifice have never been rescinded. They're all still there. They can all still be practiced, and yet they're not. Why is that? Well, the underlying reason, of course, is because it would bring utter shame to the Jewish people, because it would be seen as utterly barbaric. So it is true then that there are limits to the dedication of one's tribe and one's tribal traditions. And the Pew Research that was released in 2021 is a very important study for me, and I know Ellie mentioned it as well. In particular, 27% identified in the survey as atheist, agnostic, or nothing in particular. And another 700,000 people in the US, including myself, no longer consider themselves Jewish. They had one or two Jewish parents. They might have been raised Jewish, but they, on the survey, say that they're not Jewish. And in the 18 to 29 demographic, Jews of no religion say 40% say they're Jews of no religion. Furthermore, intermarriage, which has always been a problem in the Jewish community, just continues. 61% of married after 2009 are intermarried. And those intermarried who are raising children, 30% are not raising them as Jewish. So something is changing, and it is not going to go back. And this is true of just general religion in America as well. We're undergoing profound changes that I don't think we even realize yet the implications of. So the largest decline is what I predict is going to be in circumcision, is going to be in Jews of no religion. As Americans practice circumcision less and less, so will these Jews who don't practice Judaism. They too will give up circumcision as well. There'll be a challenge because there'll be a lot more important things to argue about in the Jewish community, and that is the survival. When you have so many people unaffiliated and intermarrying, the questions of Jewish affiliation and Jewish identity itself might mean that parents who choose not to circumcise will hold a lot more power in their position with the congregation in continuing to be engaged with the Jewish community, because the power will shift to those who are not circumcising. And if you think I'm being a little overly optimistic about this change in the demographics and the decline in the practice of circumcision among Jews, I want you to consider my grandfather in Warsaw, Poland at the turn of the 20th century. Every Day of Atonement, he would pick up a chicken and he would swing it around his head to transfer his sins into the chicken, which then he would hand over to the ritual slaughterer for slaughter. And my father, of course, was a Reform rabbi, and here I am standing before you. I'm a vegan, I'm an atheist, and I'm an activist. So there you go.